She tried to trade her ring for food until the rancher's son said, "Gold isn't what we need, you are." The dust swirled around Eliza Carter's worn boots as she stood outside Holbrook's general store. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the small gold band. The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalk, and she could feel the eyes of passers-by boring into her back. A widow at 24 with nothing left but the clothes on her back and this single piece of gold that once promised forever. "Please, Mr. Holbrook," she said quietly, pushing the ring across the counter. The storekeeper, a portly man with graying whiskers, barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "Ma'am, I told you already. Gold don't fill bellies around here. What folks need is strong backs for harvest, not jewelry." He pushed the ring back toward her with a stubby finger. "You'd best try your luck elsewhere." Eliza's stomach clenched with hunger. She hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. Not since she'd spent her last penny on a stale biscuit in the previous town. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride was becoming a luxury she could no longer afford. "Just a loaf of bread," she whispered, "or some cornmeal. Anything." The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered. Eliza didn't turn around, too focused on willing the storekeeper to show mercy. Her late husband, Thomas, had bought this ring in St. Louis, saving for months to afford it. Now it seemed worthless as a pebble on the prairie. "Problem here, Holbrook?" A deep voice spoke from behind her. "No problem, Mr. Harper," Holbrook replied. "Just explaining to this lady that we don't trade in gold." Eliza finally turned. The man who'd entered was tall and lean with sun-weathered features that spoke of long days under the open sky. His clothes were practical but well-maintained: canvas pants, a blue work shirt, leather vest. Not a townsman, she realized, but not quite a drifter either. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, the color of prairie grass, took in her travel-stained dress and hollow cheeks with a quick, assessing glance. "I was just leaving," Eliza said, reaching for the ring. Her hand shook with the effort of maintaining composure. "That's a wedding band," the man observed quietly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Holbrook, give the lady some provisions. Put it on my account." The storekeeper's eyebrows shot up. "Now, Mr. Harper." "My account," Daniel Harper repeated firmly. Then to Eliza, "Ma'am, I don't mean to presume, but gold isn't what we need out here. You are." She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "My father runs Harper Ranch about 5 miles north. We lost our cook last month when she married and moved to Colorado. We've got 8 ranch hands who can rope a steer blindfolded, but can't boil water without burning it." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "If you can cook and aren't afraid of hard work, we've got a position available. Room, board, and wages." Eliza's throat tightened. She'd been a merchant's wife in Missouri before the fever took Thomas and the bank took everything else. Cooking for ranch hands wasn't what she'd imagined her life would become, but then neither was starving on the prairie. "I can cook," she managed. "Then we'd be obliged if you'd consider the position." He turned to Holbrook. "Get her whatever she needs for the road. Some proper supplies, too." As the storekeeper grudgingly began filling a basket, Daniel Harper studied her with those steady green eyes. "When did you last eat a real meal?" Pride flared briefly. "That's not your concern, Mr. Harper." "It is, if you're going to work for us. Can't have you fainting into the stew pot." His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "There's a boarding house across the street. Mrs. Donnelly serves a fair noon meal. You could eat, rest up, and I'll come back with the wagon in 2 hours." "I haven't accepted your offer yet." "No, ma'am, you haven't, but you're considering it. Else you'd have walked out already." He placed some coins on the counter. "For Mrs. Donnelly," he said to Holbrook. "See, the lady gets there safely." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Keep your ring, Mrs.?" "Eliza Carter." "Mrs. Carter, keep it. Out here we don't trade away our memories. We just learn to carry them different." After he left, Holbrook handed her the basket, now heavy with cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, and even a small bag of sugar. "Daniel Harper's a good man," he said grudgingly. "His pa's fair, too. It's honest work they're offering." Eliza nodded, clutching the basket with one hand and the ring with the other. Through the store window, she watched Daniel Harper mount his horse with easy grace. He sat for a moment, looking back at the store, then touched his hat brim and rode off in a cloud of dust. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building that had seen better days. Mrs. Donnelly, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked Eliza up and down before showing her to a small table near the kitchen. "Daniel Harper sent you, did he? Good boy, that one. Shame about his mother passing last year. The ranch hasn't been the same without a woman's touch." She set down a plate of beef stew and cornbread. "Eat up, dear. You look like a stiff wind would blow you clear to Nebraska." The food was simple but plentiful, and Eliza had to force herself to eat slowly. Pride might be a luxury, but dignity she could still afford. As she ate, she turned the gold band over in her fingers, remembering Thomas's face when he'd slipped it on her hand. He'd been so proud, so sure of their future together. "Nothing wrong with taking a new direction," Mrs. Donnelly said, noticing her preoccupation. "This territory is full of folks starting over. Some running from something, some running to something. The lucky ones find what they're looking for." 2 hours later, Eliza stood on the boarding house porch, her meager belongings in a worn carpet bag, the basket of provisions at her feet. The sound of wagon wheels announced Daniel Harper's return before she saw him round the corner. He handled the team of horses with the same quiet competence he'd shown in the store. "Mrs. Carter." He jumped down to help her with her things. "Decided to take a chance on us. It seems I have little choice." Quote, "Ma'am, there's always a choice, just sometimes one option's better than the others." He lifted her carpet bag into the wagon bed with ease. "The ranch is a fair piece out. We'll be there before sundown." As she settled onto the wagon seat, Eliza took one last look at the town, Holbrook's General Store, where she nearly traded away her last link to her former life, the boarding house where kindness had come with beef stew and wisdom, the dusty street where desperation had driven her to consider the unthinkable. "Second thoughts?" Daniel asked, gathering the reins. "No," she said firmly. "No second thoughts." As they rolled out of town, the vast prairie stretched before them, golden grass rippling like waves in the wind. The sky was impossibly wide, a dome of blue broken only by wisps of cloud. It was beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. This land, she thought, it demanded everything and promised nothing. "Your father won't mind that you've hired a complete stranger?" Eliza asked as the town disappeared behind them. "Pa trusts my judgment. Besides, we're all strangers out here until we're not." He glanced at her. "That ring? Your husband?" "Fever. 6 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "My mother used to say the prairie takes everything soft away from you. But if you're strong enough, it gives you something back. A different kind of softness, maybe the kind that comes from surviving." Eliza thought about that as they rode toward her uncertain future. She'd lost everything soft, her comfortable home, her merchant husband, her place in society, but she was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. Maybe that was its own kind of strength. The sun was beginning its descent when Daniel pointed ahead. There, Harper Ranch. In the distance, she could see buildings taking shape, a main house, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse. Smoke rose from a chimney, and she could make out figures moving among a herd of cattle. It wasn't much by Missouri standards, but against the vast emptiness of the prairie, it looked like civilization itself. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, "such as it is." Eliza straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She'd been a merchant's wife, soft and sheltered. That woman had died with Thomas in Missouri. The woman riding into Harper Ranch was someone new, someone the prairie was still shaping. She clutched her wedding ring one more time, then slipped it into her pocket, not throwing it away, not trading it for bread, but carrying it forward into whatever came next. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. Before Daniel could help her down, the front door opened and a man emerged, older, grayer, but bearing the same lean build and steady gaze as his son. "Pa, this is Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, lifting Eliza's carpet bag from the wagon. "She's agreed to take on the cooking." Jacob Harper studied her with eyes that missed nothing. His face was carved by wind and weather into deep lines, but there was no cruelty in it. "Ma'am," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat, "Daniel says you've fallen on hard times." "I'm willing to work, Mr. Harper," Eliza replied, meeting his gaze directly. "That's all that matters now." A ghost of approval flickered across the older man's features. "Fair enough. Daniel will show you to your quarters. Supper's at 6 sharp. The men get powerful cranky when they're kept waiting." He paused, then added more gently, "We're glad to have you, Mrs. Carter. It's been too long since this kitchen saw proper use." The kitchen, as it turned out, was both better and worse than Eliza had expected. The room itself was spacious, with a large cast-iron stove, sturdy work tables, and shelves lined with provisions, but dust coated every surface. The remnants of the ranch hands' attempts at cooking were evident in scorched pots and a sink full of unwashed dishes. "I know it's a sight," Daniel said apologetically, setting her bag down. "The boys tried their best, but—" "It's fine," Eliza interrupted, already rolling up her sleeves. "Though I'll need water heated for cleaning, and someone will have to show me where everything's kept." "I'll fetch water," he offered immediately. "Your room's through there. It's small, but it's private. Used to be the pantry before Ma had it converted." The room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window looking out toward the barn. Eliza set her few belongings on the bed and returned to face the disaster of a kitchen. "How many men am I cooking for?" she asked. 8 hands, plus Pa and me. Sometimes more during roundup or when we hire extras." Daniel was already pumping water into buckets. "The men eat hearty. They work hard." As he heated water on the stove, Eliza began her assessment. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, preserved goods. There was even a root cellar with potatoes and onions. She could work with this. "What time do the men rise?" "First light. They'll want coffee and breakfast by 5. He glanced at her. "I know it's a lot to ask, starting tomorrow." "I'll manage." She began sorting through the pots, setting aside those too damaged to save. "Mr. Harper, Daniel, where's the nearest creek for washing?" "Behind the house, about 50 yards, but we haul water for the kitchen." He paused in his work. "Mrs. Carter, about what I said in town." She looked up from scrubbing a pot. "Yes. When I said gold isn't what we need, you are. I meant it. This ranch runs on work and grit, not pretty things. We've all got our reasons for being here, our losses. What matters is what we do with today." Before she could respond, the door banged open and men began filing in, drawn by the smell of heated water and the sight of a woman in the kitchen. They were a rough-looking bunch, sun-darkened and dusty, ranging from a boy who couldn't be more than 17 to a grizzled man who might have been 60. "Boys," Daniel said firmly, "this is Mrs. Carter, our new cook. Mind your manners." Quote. They shuffled and muttered greetings, hats coming off in awkward deference. The youngest, tow-headed and freckled, blurted out, "Ma'am, does this mean no more of Hank's beans?" "Hey now," protested a burly man with a thick mustache, presumably Hank. "My beans ain't that bad." "Your beans could chew a horse," another man drawled, earning a round of laughter. "Enough." Jacob Harper's voice cut through the noise from the doorway. "Mrs. Carter's got work to do. You all clear out and let her do it. Supper's at 6. They filed out reluctantly, but Eliza caught the hope in their eyes. As the door closed behind them, she turned to Daniel. "Is there coffee?" "They'll expect coffee in the morning. I'll show you where everything is," he said. And for the next hour, he helped her navigate the kitchen's mysteries: where the coffee was stored, how the stove's dampers worked, which pots were for what purpose. He was patient and thorough, and she found herself relaxing slightly. "Your mother," she ventured as she seasoned a salvaged pot, "she taught you about kitchens?" "Some. I was the youngest. Spent more time in the house than my brothers." A shadow crossed his face. "They're gone now. The war took them. It's just Pa and me running things." The war, it had taken so many, left so many women widowed, so many families broken. Eliza didn't ask which side. Out here, it mattered less than survival. By the time the sun had fully set, she had the kitchen in some semblance of order, and a simple supper ready. Beans properly seasoned this time, cornbread, and fried salt pork. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. The men filed in promptly at 6, taking their places at the long table with an eagerness that would have been comical if it weren't so earnest. Jacob took the head, Daniel to his right, and Eliza served quickly and efficiently. The first bite was met with absolute silence. Then the youngest, Billy, she'd learned his name, let out a sound that was almost a moan. "Ma'am, it's food." "Billy," she said crisply, "eat it while it's hot." But she saw the looks exchanged, the way they ate with renewed appetite, cleaning their plates and looking hopefully for more. She'd made extra, anticipating hungry men, and watched with satisfaction as the serving platters emptied. "Mrs. Carter," Jacob Harper said as she cleared the table, "that was a fine meal, first one we've had in too long." The compliment was simple, but she could see he meant it. The other men murmured agreement, and she caught Daniel watching her with something like gratitude in his eyes. After supper, as she washed dishes, Daniel appeared at her elbow with a dish towel. "You don't have to," she began. "Ma made everyone help with cleanup. No reason to change now." He took a dripping plate from her hands. "The men are already talking about breakfast. Billy offered to get up early to help with the fire if it means proper biscuits." "I'll manage the fire myself, thank you." But she was pleased despite herself. It had been so long since anyone had appreciated anything she'd done. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "I knew you would." Quote, "You knew nothing about me except that I was desperate enough to trade my wedding ring for bread. I knew you still had pride in your bearing, even hungry. Knew you looked at that ring like it meant something more than gold. Knew you didn't beg, even when begging might have worked." He set down the towel and met her eyes. "People reveal themselves in hard moments, Mrs. Carter. What I saw in that store was someone who'd bend but not break." The words settled into her chest, warming something that had been cold for months. She turned back to the dishes to hide whatever might be showing on her face. "Fine words, Mr. Harper, but I'm just a cook now. Nothing more." "Nothing wrong with honest work." He picked up the towel again. "And please, just Daniel. Mr. Harper is my father." They finished the dishes in companionable silence. As Eliza dried her hands, she noticed him pull something from his pocket. A small bunch of prairie flowers, already slightly wilted. "Picked these on the way back from town," he said almost shyly. "Thought your room might use them. Ma always liked flowers in the house." The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle from this quiet man, that Eliza felt her throat tighten. She took the flowers carefully. "Thank you, Daniel." He nodded and turned to go, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Carter, what you said about being just a cook, you're wrong. You're someone who's choosing to build something new instead of lying down in the ashes of what was. That takes courage most folks don't have." After he left, Eliza stood in the clean kitchen, holding the prairie flowers. Through the window, she could see lights in the bunkhouse, hear the low rumble of men's voices and occasional laughter. Above, stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Missouri. She found a small jar for the flowers and placed them on the windowsill in her room. As she prepared for bed, her hand went automatically to her pocket where the wedding ring rested. Thomas would have liked Daniel Harper, she thought, would have appreciated his straightforward manner and quiet kindness. For the first time in 6 months, the thought of her husband didn't bring the sharp stab of grief she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, there was a gentler ache, like an old bruise rather than a fresh wound. Tomorrow would come early, 4 o'clock, to start the fires, to begin the bread, to brew coffee strong enough to wake men who worked from dawn to dusk. It would be hard work, harder than anything she'd done as a merchant's wife. But it was work and shelter, and people who looked at her with hope instead of pity. "Gold isn't what we need. You are." The words echoed in her mind as she lay down on the narrow bed, fully clothed except for her boots. Tomorrow she'd unpack properly, wash her spare dress, settle in. Tonight, she was too tired for anything but sleep. But just before she drifted off, she thought about Daniel's eyes when he'd handed her those flowers. Green as prairie grass, warm as summer rain. Something fluttered in her chest, unfamiliar after months of numbness. Not hope, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, the possibility of it. The rooster's crow came too soon, pulling Eliza from dreams of Missouri mornings and Thomas's gentle smile. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching across the narrow bed for a warmth that wasn't there. Then, the unfamiliar walls came into focus, and with them, the weight of her new reality. Harper Ranch, day 1. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, pinning her hair back severely and tying on the apron she'd found hanging behind the door. The kitchen was cold and silent, but she knew what to do now. First the fire, coaxing life from last night's embers, then water for coffee set to boil while she mixed biscuit dough. By the time Boots began stomping on the porch, she had coffee brewing strong enough to float a horseshoe and biscuits turning golden in the oven. The door opened to admit Billy, the tow-headed boy, his eyes hopeful. "Morning, ma'am. That coffee I smell?" "It'll be ready when you are," she said briskly. Breakfast at 5 means breakfast at 5. Not a moment before, but she softened her words with a small smile, and Billy grinned back before retreating to wait with the others. She could hear them gathering outside, voices low and expectant. At 5 precisely, she opened the door. "Breakfast is served." They filed in with more order than the previous evening, taking their usual seats. Daniel nodded to her as he passed, and she noticed he'd already been working. His shirt showed traces of hay and horsehair. "Morning chores," he explained, catching her glance. "Horses don't care what time a man rises." She served quickly. Biscuits, gravy made from last night's drippings, fried potatoes, and thick slices of salt pork. The coffee disappeared so fast she had to brew a second pot before she could pour her own cup. "Mrs. Carter," Jacob said as he split his third biscuit. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" Quote, "My mother, back in Ohio. Then my husband." She stopped, cleared her throat. "A woman learns what she needs to learn." "Well, we're grateful for your learning," said Samuel, an older hand with a weathered face and a kind smile. "Haven't had biscuits this light since my own mama's kitchen." The praise warmed her more than the coffee. As the men prepared to head out for the day's work, Daniel lingered. "The supply wagon goes to town end of the week," he said. "Make a list of what you need. Pa already said to get whatever makes your work easier." "That's generous." "It's practical," he replied with a faint smile. "Good food keeps good workers." He paused at the door. "There's a milk cow in the barn, Rosie. She's gentle enough if you want fresh milk for cooking. I can show you after supper." The morning flew by in a rhythm of washing, kneading, planning. She explored the root cellar, took inventory of the larder, and discovered a neglected kitchen garden behind the house, choked with weeds, but still alive. At noon, she packed cold biscuits, cheese, and dried beef into a basket. Daniel appeared to collect it, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the breeze. "They're grateful," he said simply. "Hank usually just throws hardtack in a sack." "Hardtack?" she repeated, appalled. No wonder they were so pleased with simple beans. His laugh was rusty, as if unused. "Ma'am, you could serve them boot leather and they'd thank you, long as it wasn't Hank's cooking." She found herself smiling back. "I'll aim a bit higher than boot leather." That afternoon brought unexpected company. 3 riders approached, dust-covered and hard-eyed. Daniel brought them in, introducing them as Wade, Collins, and Doyle, men looking for work. "Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, "these men'll be joining us a while. Roundup's coming." The tallest, Wade, tipped his hat, his gaze lingering too long. "Pleasure, ma'am. Been a long time since we seen a kitchen that smelled this good." Eliza met his eyes coolly. "Supper's at 6. Those who work eat." Wade's grin didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough." After they left, she found her hands trembling slightly. Daniel noticed. "You all right?" "Fine," she said automatically, then sighed. "They made me uneasy." "Trust your instincts," he said quietly. "We'll keep an eye on them." Quote, that night, the kitchen was full again, laughter louder, conversation looser. Eliza cooked and served, but her eyes strayed often to Daniel, steady, calm, watchful. After supper, as promised, he showed her to the barn. Rosie, the milk cow, was placid and warm, her breath sweet with hay. "Ma used to say milking was thinking time," Daniel said softly, peaceful. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. His voice held quiet grief. "This whole place feels different without her. Pa tries, but there's things a woman sees that men don't." "Such as?" "Beauty things. Comfort. She'd put flowers on the table, curtains on windows, made it feel like more than just a place to sleep." Eliza thought of the prairie flowers he'd given her. "Is that why you picked those yesterday?" Color touched his weathered cheeks. "Maybe. Seemed like something she'd want me to do." They stood in companionable silence, the scent of hay and horses around them. The barn light flickered on dust motes glowing like fireflies. "I should get back," Eliza said at last. "Early morning comes quick." Quote, "I'll walk you," he offered. Outside, the night was cool and filled with stars. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the smell of earth and rain. At the kitchen door, Daniel paused. "Mrs. Carter, Eliza." Her name sounded different in his voice. "I'm glad you're here. We all are." She looked up at him, this quiet man who had offered her work instead of pity. "I'm beginning to be glad, too." He smiled, slow and genuine. "Good. That's good." After he left, Eliza stood in the doorway, looking out into the vast night. For the first time since Missouri, she felt something other than grief, something like belonging beginning to take root. The weeks that followed fell into rhythm. She rose before dawn, her hands learning the stove's moods, the exact strength of coffee that pleased Jacob, the softness of biscuits that made Billy grin. She worked hard, harder than she'd ever imagined, but each day she felt stronger. Then, one afternoon, the rhythm shattered. "Mrs. Carter, come quick!" Billy burst through the kitchen door, pale-faced. Daniel's horse threw him. Quote, the dough she was kneading fell forgotten as she ran outside. The men were gathered near the corral. Daniel sat propped against the fence, his face gray with pain, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Without hesitation, Eliza knelt beside him. "It's dislocated," she said, her voice steady. "I can fix it." Jacob frowned. "Doc's half a day's ride." "She doesn't need the doc," Daniel said through clenched teeth. "She knows what she's doing." Eliza positioned herself carefully. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. She pulled sharply on 2. The joint popped back into place with a sickening sound. Daniel gasped, every muscle tense, then exhaled shakily. "Remind me never to argue with you." "See that you don't." She fashioned a sling from Billy's neckerchief. "You'll rest that arm for a week, no exceptions." That night she brought supper to his room, a plain plate of beans and bread. He tried to cut the meat one-handed, failing miserably until she took the knife. "Let me." "I'm not an invalid," he muttered. "No," she said, smiling faintly. "Just a stubborn fool." Quote, he laughed quietly, eyes soft. "You sound like my ma. She sounds like a woman I'd have liked." They sat in silence for a while, the air between them charged but easy. Finally he said, "You miss your husband?" "I miss what we were, but grief burns itself out eventually." She looked at him. "What's left afterward is something quieter. It's not forgetting, it's surviving." He nodded. "Ma used to say the prairie burns everything away so new things can grow." Eliza smiled sadly. "Your mother was right." Weeks passed, and Daniel's arm healed. The easy friendship between them deepened into something neither named aloud. He lingered longer in the kitchen, helped her carry water, found excuses to be near. The others noticed but said nothing, only smiled knowingly. Then one Sunday, with the men in town and Jacob visiting neighbors, Daniel saddled 2 horses. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They rode to a small hill overlooking the valley. The ranch stretched out below them, golden in the afternoon light. "My mother's buried here," he said quietly, pointing to 3 simple crosses. "She'd have liked you. You've brought life back to this place." Eliza's eyes stung. "It's not just me." "It is," he said firmly. "You're the reason the men smile again. The reason Pa laughs. The reason I—" He stopped, searching for words. "The reason this place feels like home again." She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Daniel, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just needed you to know. You're not just the cook. You're becoming everything." Her hand rose almost of its own accord, brushing his cheek. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." He covered her hand with his. "Maybe being scared together is better than being brave alone." The sun dipped low, bathing them in gold. They didn't kiss then, but the promise of it hung in the air like a vow. That night, as Eliza prepared for bed, she slipped off her wedding ring for the first time since Thomas's death. She didn't throw it away. She placed it gently in the drawer. It was time to stop surviving and start living. Months later, as spring warmed the prairie, laughter filled the ranch again. Harper Ranch thrived. The men worked hard. The land healed. And in the evenings, Daniel and Eliza walked beneath the stars, the air between them full of unspoken promises. When he finally asked her to marry him, beneath the cottonwoods by the creek, she said yes without hesitation. The ring he placed on her finger was simple gold, plain and true. And as they stood together beneath that endless sky, Eliza thought of how far she'd come, from a desperate widow trading gold for bread to a woman who'd found love, purpose, and home. Daniel had been right all along. Out here, gold wasn't what people needed. They needed courage. They needed hope. And sometimes, they just needed each other.